So I just wanted to start by acknowledging an interview earlier on Sky News with the Israeli politician Danny Danon, in which a Sky News presenter made a comparison between his comments on Israel's war with Hamas and the treatment of Jewish people in the Holocaust. Well, Sky News recognises the complete inappropriateness of that comparison and the offensive nature of those comments and has apologised unreservedly. We thought it was important just to reiterate that at the start of this interview, if that's OK with you. Let's move on to the ruling then. What's your reaction to the ICJ's findings?
Well, the most important thing we heard today from the president of the court was a rejection of the South African demand to deny Israel the right of self-defense. The right of self-defense is in international law. Every country has the right and the obligation to defend its people. And the South Africans said, no, Israel can't fight back against Hamas. And I think the court did the right thing in saying, no, that would be to discriminate against the Jewish state in a way that no other state is discriminated against. The whole South African case is frankly wrong. It's morally repugnant. They have chosen to become the lawyers for Hamas, pushing the Hamas positions. And we, as you heard, it was a good thing that Israel's right to defend itself was upheld today by the president of the court.
Are you disappointed the case wasn't thrown out?
So we had low expectations that the case would be thrown out, but it's important to remember the president of the court also said that both on if the merits of the case, the substance itself, and even on the procedural level, they still haven't made any decision whether they have jurisdiction or not. So we're waiting to hear from the court as this moves forward.
The court did order provisional measures today, didn't it? Allowing more humanitarian aid in, for example, protecting civilians, making sure that Israel complies against no acts of genocide or incitement to genocide. Will Israel abide by that?
So we will continue our fight against Hamas. Hamas is a brutal enemy and we must destroy its military capabilities. But in parallel, as you've heard me say before, we will do what needs to be done to make sure that humanitarian aid reaches the civilian population. We will continue to distinguish between the Hamas terrorists, who are a brutal enemy, and the civilian population, who are not the target of our operation. And for all these reasons, we will continue to abide by international law, by the rules of armed conflict, by humanitarian law. That's in our DNA as a democratic society.
Let's just have a look in a bit more detail at some of what the judgment said today. When it comes to incitement, the judge, Joan Donoghue, quoted the Defence Minister of Israel speaking on October the 9th, who said, "We are fighting human animals. Gaza won't return to what it was before. There will be no Hamas. We will eliminate everything." She also quoted Yisrael Katz, the then Minister of Energy, saying, "We will win. They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world." Is any of that incitement?
So it must be understood, my defense minister, who obviously is a senior member of the government and a part of the team that's in charge of waging the campaign against Hamas, he was referring to Hamas. So when you say Hamas must be destroyed, and we will be relentless in doing that is our policy. But that does not mean the civilian population of Gaza. We will fight Hamas ruthlessly, and in parallel, we will make every effort to make sure the civilian population of Gaza gets the humanitarian aid that they require, and to distinguish between them, who are not the target of our operation, as I said before, and between the Hamas terrorists.
But they're not getting all the humanitarian aid, are they? The UN humanitarian coordinator, Sir Martin Griffiths, has said Gaza has become a place of death and despair. Families are sleeping in the open, temperatures plummeting. Areas where civilians were told to relocate for their safety have become under bombardment. A public health disaster is unfolding in Gaza.
So I have no doubts that there is both tragedy and suffering in Gaza that has been brought about by this war that Hamas forced upon us all. But I think the UN needs to look at itself. And if I can say frankly, today, as you know, the UN has organized an investigation into its employees who were involved in the October 7th massacre. They've now started finally, yes, to look at this problem seriously about Hamas involvement in UN organizations. There's also the fact that one of our hostages who was released in November reported that she was held in the house of a UN employee. There were UN teachers who apparently celebrated the October 7th massacre. And I think the UN, which in many ways automatically often holds Israel, to account, what about their own relationships of their staff on the ground in Gaza with Hamas? The UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Welfare Agency, their union, which is thousands and thousands of employees, is actually run by Hamas. And that means Hamas is the boots on the ground, so to speak, for their so-called relief efforts. There are questions here that the UN must answer.
UNRWA have placed a number of employees under investigation, haven't they, and severed ties with them, and the UN...
But I just want to say, I understand what you're saying, but I think they would like to tell you it's an aberration. No, there's a structural problem that it must be addressed.
OK, the UN chief calling for a swift investigation into that. What did you make of Israel's National Security Minister today, one of the first officials to respond to the ICJ? He said quite simply on X, on Twitter, Haig Schmeig. Is that sort of language appropriate?
I'm not sure at all if that's appropriate, but I can tell you the formal response was given by the very top, by the Prime Minister himself. And you've seen his remarks, and maybe you've played the video of the remarks on Sky. He was very clear what our response was, and that was not it.
OK. We understand the court didn't require a ceasefire, but is one coming?
There are still serious work underway for a further hostage release, which would, we presume, involve a ceasefire. That's why we could get a hostage release, because Hamas is desperate for a ceasefire. And we did it in November. We could do it in January. We could do it in February. We want to see hostages out. We're willing to make efforts to make that happen. So it's not impossible, though I'm not sure how optimistic we can be. Hamas is a brutal and very fanatical enemy. Will they agree to a further release of hostages? We'll have to wait and see.
A 2-month ceasefire has been talked about, 60 days. Won't that give Hamas time to regroup?
So I obviously, Jonathan can't go into the details of what's being discussed. Negotiations don't happen, live on Sky News. They have to happen discreetly. But once again, there was a release in November that involved a cessation, a pause in the fighting to get our people out. We did it then, we can do it again. But the bottom line is this: it has to be to get our people out. Because for Israel, getting the hostages out is one of our most important aims in this conflict. They brutally kidnapped our people, and we are responsible to get them out.
Yeah, but meanwhile, more bombing, more shooting in civilian areas over the last few days. Sky's team in Gaza filming horrendous scenes. The moment a strike hit a tented area in Khan Yunis. It was on Tuesday. Our cameraman filming body parts of children and civilians.
All the pictures coming out of Hamas-controlled territory are always only of civilian casualties, yes? But you don't see a single picture coming out of Hamas-controlled territory of a single armed Hamas fighter who's been killed by the Israeli forces. And one has to ask, why is that? And is it because Hamas is an authoritarian regime that is very, very particular about what pictures it allows people to take pictures of? And if you take pictures of things that Hamas doesn't want you to take pictures of, you as a journalist, you as a correspondent, and if you live there and you're a Palestinian under Hamas's rule, there are clear limitations on what pictures you can take.